Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to be taking a deeply analytical look at a recent and, honestly, a fascinating piece of short-form commentary that's been making the rounds lately. This text attempts to completely deconstruct Indian societal identity, and it does it through a very specific, highly rhythmic rhetorical structure. Now, before we jump in, I want to be clear. Our goal today is absolutely not to take any kind of political stance here. Instead, we're just unpacking exactly how this author uses totally objective, observational statements to challenge our baseline assumptions about nationhood and religion. It's like a giant puzzle. So let's dive right in and look at the actual source material. We start with the opening line of our source text, which just says, "Take a look at India over the past few months." Simple, right? But it's incredibly direct. Right out of the gate, the author hooks us by establishing a really strict, recent timeline. They aren't talking about ancient history or distant futures here. They are forcing us to look squarely at the immediate present. And by framing the text this way, the author is basically positioning themselves as a mere observer, just someone holding up a mirror to the events that are making headlines right this second. It sets up this expectation that what follows is simply going to be a list of observable facts. All right, so that brings us to part one, the rhythm of identity. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the author's powerful use of relentless repetition. They use this literary device to force us to view these incredibly diverse, often totally contradictory societal events through one singular, uncompromising lens. The rhythm acts like a drumbeat, and it's meant to equalize the events it describes. Boom, the text immediately shatters that conventional us versus them narrative we're so used to. Normally, when we think of law and order or a clash in the streets, our brains naturally want to divide the participants into opposing factions, right? But the source text just completely strips that away. It states that the person being beaten with batons is a Hindu, and the person wielding the baton is also a Hindu. By applying the exact same identity marker to both the victim and the aggressor, the author completely neutralizes our expectation of a religious conflict and forces us to look strictly at the power dynamic instead. From there, that rhythmic drumbeat shifts seamlessly away from scenes of physical violence and right into deep, systemic societal issues, specifically the recent NEET education crisis. On one side, you have the perpetrator, the person accused in the exam paper leak. On the other, you've got the victim, the student whose entire future was tragically derailed by the cancellation of that exam. And again, the text notes that both of these individuals share the exact same identity. The author's methodically proving here that this shared label encompasses literally everyone, those who exploit the system and those who are absolutely crushed by it. Moving right along to section 2, paradoxes in society. So the author isn't just cherry-picking random headlines out of thin air. They are systematically mapping out the fundamental pillars of a functioning nation to build this massive overarching argument. And they're notably doing all this without ever making an explicit political claim of their own, which is wild. If you look at this cross-sectional map of daily national life, we hit law and order, education, faith, and civic ethics. In every single one of those rows, we have a profound paradox. We've got a clash of interests or morals or legal standing, yet the text asserts that the overarching religious identity remains perfectly constant across every single column and row. It's a highly calculated rhetorical strategy. It's designed to show us that a single identity group is large enough to contain every possible contradiction of a modern state. Let's move to and see how this builds upon the earlier points, because it actually builds vertically. It's not just about a two-sided clash between a civilian and a police officer anymore. Look at this hierarchy. You have the person being beaten, the person wielding the baton, and finally, the authority figure actually ordering the baton charge. The source material explicitly identifies the person giving the orders as sharing the exact same identity too. This introduces the concept of vertical power structures. The text is basically showing us that from the absolute bottom of the power dynamic on the street, all the way up to the highest command level, the identity remains totally homogeneous. And we see this exact same vertical mapping applied to the NEET exam crisis. Just look at this incredibly complex web of actors the author lists out. You've got the corrupt opportunist who leaked the paper, you have the buyer who sought an unfair advantage, then there's the administrator or decider who had the sheer power to cancel the exam, and finally the tragic victim who literally just wanted to take their test. Now, in a functioning society, these four groups have wildly different motivations and legal standings, right? Yet the author relentlessly repeats their point. Every single person in this chain is a Hindu. It's a really fascinating way to demonstrate just how vast and varied a single demographic actually is when you look at it in practice. Next, the text turns its observational lens toward the realm of faith itself, and we are presented with a stark, undeniable juxtaposition. On one side, we have extreme piety and devotion, the person who physically helped build the Ram temple and the person who donated their hard-earned wealth to it. But on the other side, extreme transgression within that exact same sacred space, the person accused of stealing from it. Even in the most religiously charged environment imaginable, the author is pointing out that both the ultimate protector and the ultimate violator of that space share the exact same religious label. Then the author tackles civic ethics, the person accused of corruption versus the person protesting against corruption. By this point in the text, the pacing feels absolutely relentless. This mirroring effect is designed to build real tension. The author is essentially boxing the reader in, proving point by point, across law, education, faith, and ethics, that internal societal conflict doesn't actually require two different demographics. A single demographic is perfectly capable of oppressing itself, fighting itself, and policing itself. Which brings us to our third and final section, the ultimate question. The author has taken us through this intense, rhythmic sequence of societal mirrors and paradoxes, right? They've built an undeniable pattern. Well, now, this rhetorical exercise reaches its intentional climax, tying all these everyday societal observations directly to the absolute pinnacle of national leadership. The text lands this heavy declarative statement: the Prime Minister of India is a Hindu. By placing the ultimate seat of political power at the very end of this long chain of everyday citizens, the protesters, the students, the police, the thieves, the author connects the very top of the nation's hierarchy to the baseline identity they've been describing all along. It basically confirms that the entire ecosystem, from the streets to the highest office, operates under this one shared demographic umbrella. And then the author just stops the rhythmic observations. They pivot entirely from making statements to setting us up. So here's the question. Does India automatically become a Hindu Rashtra? That is the final, incredibly provocative question left hanging for the reader to grapple with. Now, the term Hindu Rashtra essentially translates to a Hindu nation. And the absolute brilliance of this source material lies in the fact that it doesn't just hand you the answer. Instead, it uses these objective, paradoxical observations of daily life to really challenge your core definitions. Think about it. If a nation's victims, its perpetrators, its everyday citizens, and its top leaders all happen to share the exact same identity, does that organically make it a state defined by that identity? Or does the sheer internal diversity and conflict within that group prove that a single label is entirely insufficient to define a complex nation? It's a masterful piece of rhetoric that really forces you to think deeply about the nuts and bolts of identity and statehood. And it definitely leaves us hungry to explore these concepts a whole lot further. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep analyzing the complex world around you, and I will see you in the next one.